Well, good morning and welcome to our home in Bromley Common, where we continue with our Lent Reflections. And happy St. Patrick's Day, 17th of March. Well, yesterday, Richard talked about Bartimaeus, the way Jesus opens the eyes of the blind. If you remember back in Luke, when he first started his ministry, Jesus said that he had come to open the eyes of the blind. He also said that he had come to set the prisoners free. And this is what we're going to be focusing on this morning. Jesus opposes those who would enslave others. And this ties a little bit in with the story of St. Patrick. Patrick was born probably somewhere in the Lake District, but in a Christian family. But he was enslaved and taken to Ireland. Many years later, he escaped and trained to be a priest in France before returning back and hearing a call from God to go back to Ireland. He knew the risks in going back to Ireland. As an escaped slave, he was a wanted man. If he was caught, he would face death. But he went anyway. It is said that when he was cornered while opposing the evils that held sway in the land, God turned him into a deer so that he was able to escape. Now we know Jesus confronted evil, slavery, and imprisonment. The story of the woman caught in adultery demonstrates this. If you want to read it, it's in John chapter 8, 1 to 11. So a woman is dragged out of the house, completely naked, and she's dragged out by the religious authorities into the market square. And they are accusing her of adultery. Basically, they want to ask what Jesus would do with her, because as far as they were concerned, she should be stoned. So she's forced to stand in the middle of the square while the men leered and jeered and threatened her with more violence and death. And they appeal to the law for their violence. But note who's missing. There are no other women in this story. And actually, neither do we see her husband or her lover mentioned. I wonder if the other women are hiding behind the net curtains. The woman is left defenseless. She's used as a pawn by the religious leaders for their own battles of power and authority. Jesus' actions are understated. He simply bends down and writes in the sand. Many scholars have debated what has he written, but it doesn't matter. The point is, he averted his gaze from the woman. He gave her space. By averting his gaze, he gave her dignity. And he diffused the tension because everyone was focusing. What was he writing? What was he writing? But when he was pressed by these hostile lawmakers, he stood up and addressed them and said, "If any of you is without sin, let them be the first to cast a stone." Jesus had undermined their appeals to the law, their appeals to moral decency and societal values that they themselves as men had set. He has exposed them and revealed their own violence. And they're moving so far away from the truth of Scripture, where God made both men and women in God's own image equally. The accusers slink away, and the woman is left there, still standing totally naked in the street. But Jesus addresses her. Before, she's regarded as this woman, but now he addresses her, woman, lady. He gives her worth and identity, and she is free, no longer a victim. Patrick at the Hill of Tara lit a bonfire in defiance of the local king, a symbolic action denoting Christ's light and presence. He opposed violence, not with more violence, but with a peaceful demonstration, a symbolic, resolute witness. And when we look through history, we can see how these acts of non-violent protest have actually made a difference. Think about people like Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old who refused to give her seat up to a white man on a bus, well before Rosa Parks. But also there is Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth, Gandhi, Emmeline Pankhurst, the factory workers of Dagenham. All these actions did eventually bring change. It was a long process. And while their methods were frowned upon, they did highlight the inequalities in society. Wait for our clock to chime the hour. We forget about the clock sometimes. As time passes. So the way of Jesus involves standing against violence, whether it be verbal, state-sanctioned, sexual and gender violence, or racism. The Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, even the vigil for Sarah Everard and the ensuing cries for safety for women. These all take courage. If you've seen the pictures of that young woman being arrested at the vigil, you can see the note of fear, but also defiance in her eyes. Why should she be arrested for standing up for something that is so evil in our society, that women don't feel safe? St. Patrick wrote a prayer which calls on the strength of Christ to protect, save, and shield, and strengthen us against all that is evil, so that we might see Christ in the eye of everyone and demonstrate the way of Christ in our lives. So be blessed, take courage, and yes, we will continue following the ways of Jesus tomorrow. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Bye-bye.